Welcome everybody to our 5th edition of the IJP Global Fellows Talk. As part of the series Reset Germany, what follows, or maybe we should say what happened after the Merkel era, the Global Fellows Talks look ahead. I'm Marco Vollmer. I'm member of the board of the IJP, the International Journalist Programs. I'm heading the exchange program with the Southern African countries. And together with my colleague Vasilios Theodosiou, I'm your host of this new Global Web Talk series.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm Vasilios Theodosiou. I'm the head of IJP's German-British program and German-Nordic program. Our topic for today, foreign policy, the war in Europe. When we started this lecture series about 2 months ago, there was no war. There were not 100 billion euros for military. There was no hot war in Europe. The scenery has changed dramatically in foreign policy and in security policy. And our question is now, after all what's happening in Ukraine, what does that all mean for Germany? Where is the road to go from today? We are having two distinguished guests today. Just to make an announcement, Anna Luhrmann, the Secretary of State of the Foreign Office, couldn't make it today for obvious reasons. So our guests are, Marco.
Yeah, our distinguished guests of today are Knut Abraham, new elected member of the German Parliament, the Deutsche Bundestag, for the opposition, the Conservative Party, CDU, Christian Democrats. He studied law in Bonn and worked since 1998 professionally as a German diplomat in the Foreign Office and in the Federal Chancellery in Berlin, and at the embassies in Helsinki, in Sofia, in Washington, D.C., and in Warsaw. In Warsaw, he has been Germany's deputy ambassador to Poland since July 2018. So he knows more or less and even better than everyone else here the region where we are talking about. And I would like to start, Mr. Abraham, with the question, what is your impression today? I think we have always estimated every day. What is your estimation of today? How can politics stop the inconceivable suffering of the people in Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope you can hear me. Yeah, does this work?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, fine. We all here in Berlin and of course globally, we are under this under this shock. Let me say that way. It's really a shock of an ongoing war. And what does that mean for politics is of course something we have to discuss now. But the main point at this very hour is that it is an ongoing military operation. It's a war, a Russian war on the neighbor, on Ukraine. And the situation we are facing, and I'm very much impressed that Mr. Schröder is with us, is that Putin is seeking a military solution. This limits today's means and possibilities of politics. So this is where we start from. It's an ongoing war in Europe. Secondly, we have, of course, to deal with really the heartbreaking suffering of Ukrainian people. So everything in our power to provide humanitarian aid to receive the refugees who are coming in hundreds of thousands, almost 2 million. This is what we also have to do at this very moment. Of course, as the Chancellor Scholz has decided, and this is what Germany stands for, is also continuing support, limited support, but support of weapons to Ukraine in the limits the Chancellor has mentioned. And thirdly, and this might be the role of politics in a way at this moment, of course, to do everything supporting efforts on a ceasefire, to come let mediators come in. We will surely discuss who that could be. And of course, for all of us, preserve European and Western unity.
Thank you, Knut, for the introduction, and please welcome more than a replacement for Anna Bührmann, Tore Schröder. Tore is an alumnus of IJP. Usually, in normal times, he is a correspondent for Süddeutsche Zeitung based in Beirut, covering the Middle East. Nowadays, he in Kiev, and we have him now live from Kiev. Tore, how's it going? How do you see the current situation? I think you are in Kiev since Friday.
I'm in Kiev, and it's fairly silent and quiet here in my hotel room. I've been here since Friday. Today's Monday, right? So 3 nights. Maybe I'm just gonna kind of take you along on my journey, how I got here. So 2 weeks ago, the war started, and I had been basically on the edge of my seat and wanting to go here already from the beginning and before, because I mean, the last few years, basically my modus operandi was to go to crisis and to report from it. It started with the Beirut blast, and then I was in Karabakh, and that worked really well. And then I was in Afghanistan 3 times last year for a total of 9 weeks. And then I was offered this job to work for Süddeutsche as the MENA correspondent. Yeah, and so I was kind of stuck in Beirut and covering this vast area from Morocco to Oman. And I was, in the last few months, I was flying around the area and, you know, bringing stories from there, but also working from my desk and doing analysis pieces, all the while obviously having an eye on what's going on in Europe and, you know, the whole developments in Ukraine and Russia. And I guess if I wouldn't have had the job, then I would have already been here before the outbreak of the war, because I mean, it was really building up, although I guess all of us here on this panel or in the audience and the speakers, none of us could have really imagined that this would actually take place. Yeah. And then it started. And I remember that I got up early because I had to write some kind of analysis piece. And it was 4 o'clock in Beirut or something. And I said on the second day, I should, to my editor at Süddeutsche, you know, I would be willing to go. But he said, and rightfully so, we have, you know, correspondence for that region. And therefore I stayed put, and I was kind of covering the Middle Eastern angle. And I mean, this is a conflict that has huge repercussions also for the Middle East in terms of grain prices, in terms of gas and oil. And so I was covering that. And now after 2 weeks, I felt like, you know, I could basically go, because I have this deal where I have 70% where I do my work for Süddeutsche, and then for the remaining 30%, I can do magazine stories. So I flew to Krakow via Frankfurt and teamed up with friends of friends, Polish guys who were bringing in supplies, humanitarian supplies to Ukrainians to Lviv. And we went in a convoy of, I don't know, 4 cars, had maybe a 3-hour waiting time at the border. And yeah, went to Lviv, and formerly Lemberg in German. And I had been to Lviv the last time for BZ, for a local Berlin newspaper 10 years ago, covering the Euro on a very short trip. And it's quite amazing to see how much has been done in that beautiful town. It's really polished, and you can see like the grandeur of the car times of the Imperial Times Austria there, Austria-Hungary. And then my friend picked me up, who's a war photographer, and she had been working with Christoph Reuter of Spiegel, and she brought him to Lviv, from where he took a train, and I drove with her into Kiev. And so we arrived on Friday evening, and there's a curfew here at 8 o'clock. So at 8 o'clock, nobody is allowed to be on the streets, because they want to make sure that there are no saboteurs, because the city apparently is full of Russian saboteurs. And we were a bit late because we actually didn't leave on time in the morning in Lviv, and it's a long ride. It was an 11-hour car ride. And we came to we were on one of these big, you know, roads going into town, and you go into checkpoints all over the country and so on, and then came to this massive checkpoint, and there were the army guys in their camouflage attire, and with the guns and kind of edgy, and they were checking our documents, and then they said, like, listen, it's really dangerous ahead to go into town, and if you want to go, then it's you are to blame if something happens. And so we went anyhow, and we were like racing through this empty, huge street to the hotel. Nothing happened, so but a lot happened in our minds. What could you were thinking a lot, what could happen, and then we arrived. And Kiev itself is, I think it's a city of normally 4.5 million. It's really, I mean, a huge city with these big Soviet era blocks, but also a lot of building has taken place in obviously the last 8 years since I have last been here. And now it's a bit like this movie with Will Smith. What's it called? The Day After Tomorrow? Day After Tomorrow, is it called? I'm not sure. It's empty. So you have maybe, I can only guess, or I think that's what I've heard, like 1 million people left, maybe 1/4 or less of the population. You have these big checkpoints everywhere with cylinder concrete blocks and these hedgehogs, these metal bars that are put together, and these Krähenfüße in German. What's it in English? I don't know. These little spiky things that you can pull across the street, so it flattens the tires of any car that might be passing. And then you have heavily armed soldiers and territorial defense guys. And the soundtrack is that you have artillery fire from, if I'm going to say far away, it's not really correct because it is not so far. It's, I think it's like 15 kilometers from Kiev, from the city center, the fighting, to the northeast and the northwest. And one place where all the journalists were flocking to is Irpin. Irpin is actually, it's a very kind of nice foresty suburb with these typical Ukrainian wooden houses, and then some newer blocks there. And they were evacuating from there. So most of the coverage of people being evacuated, you've probably seen from that place. That's where the Ukrainians at the very start of the war blew up this bridge in order to eventually stop the Russian advance, when they were thinking that the Russians would just march through. And so there have been these heart-wrenching pictures of people being evacuated. And we went inside, and that was the day before yesterday. And we hopped on one of these evacuation buses that came with people, but went back inside without. Obviously, we wore our helmets and our body armor. And then pretty soon, then we saw soldiers actually operating, and I'm not sure, probably cleansing out the forest there or whatnot. And went to a community center there, Baptist Church Community Center, and saw these old people and disabled people and women with their children. They were playing Candy Crush in the basement, and then we went to a family who was living in the basement since a few days, or since actually the start of the war, which is now 2 weeks. And we were talking to them and asked them why they're still there, and they said because we have tried twice. We have a little baby here of, I'm not sure, 6 months or so, and it was just too hectic. It was too dangerous, and we went back.
Just one moment. We can maybe open the floor a little bit. Thank you for the first impression. No, I completely understand. It's a massive impression it gave us. But still, we want to give our alumni the chance to ask questions and to get into a discussion about what the situation really looks like. And then we come back to Irpin. I promise that in just a second.
There's more to say. Okay.
Okay, I completely agree. So if you have a question, please raise your hand electronically, or just ask your question in the chat. The Krähenfüße you mentioned are called caltrops in English. So caltrops. That's what Michael Gärtner wrote in the chat. So please, if you have any comments or questions to ask, please don't be shy. Raise your hand, or just write your question in the chat. I just, please.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. Michael.
Hedgehogs are the big ones.
Hedgehogs are the big ones. Okay, so caltrops are the smaller ones. So as there are actually no questions from the audience, Maybe you just say how many journalists have you seen, or do you know are around in Kiev or Irpin at all?
And
So-
maybe you can also, and I may add one more question, because I think that's quite interesting for us here who are watching television news and online media. When you have talked to people still staying in Kiev and still staying in the cell in the metro stations, do they still hopeful? Do they have hope? This would interest me. Like, are they optimistic about their situation?
I mean, I saw Klitschko just today before, and he basically said we have to beat them back. The people who are staying here, well, that one family, for instance, in Irpin, that we talked to, they were actually more fatalistic after having tried, and in vain. They said, if the Russians come, then we have to deal with that. Then we just have to live under their rule. That was them. And others were also more like, they were full of battle spirit, but optimistic as in the Russians won't come. No, more like if they come, we will show them. More like this was the spirit that I've encountered here. Sorry for just spurting out, but if you want, I can continue, or you can ask more. But yeah.
We have a question now from the audience, from Niels Fricke. Does the attacks on journalists like the Sky News team and the death of Brent Renault affect your work?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that was Irpin. That we don't know exactly where he was shot, but so we were there. Let me just continue, because I've only been here a few days, so I'll just give you an idea of what I've done. We were with that family, and then the uncle made me drink vodka with him and so on. It was all like, when nothing happens, then it's all a thrill. And then we went to a post and talked to Ukrainian soldiers, and that was like the last post at the end, at the very far end of Irpin, and behind there were the Russians. And then when you get out and nothing happened, and you just heard basically the thunder, then you think like, okay, you don't really. I mean, I for myself, you didn't feel like really threatened and in danger that much. And then yesterday, the news of Brent Renault was his name, right? Being killed was really a reality check and a warning for me personally, because Johanna, my friend, the photographer, she went back in to evacuate that family yesterday. And she had been there exactly when Brent Renault went in. I didn't come along because they needed the space in the car to evacuate them. So I stayed back in the hotel. And later on, I met the family when they were in Kiev then and being picked up by somebody else. And that's when we got the news. And now they have closed off Irpin. And we are all, like all the different journalists, we're all trying to find out, to pinpoint where this guy was killed, where that car was shot at and ambushed. And we don't know. And I'm not even sure it was Russians. Maybe it was even friendly fire, and it was Ukrainians, mistaking them for somebody. That's fog of war. I couldn't tell you, but the next time I go into such a situation, namely a village or any, a town that is right on the front, I would probably treat more carefully.
We have a question coming in from Guillermo. Guillermo, I see you. You can ask a question if you like yourself by unmuting yourself. And please introduce yourself. Where are you from?
Hi, have a nice day. I am a journalist from Uruguay. I take part in the IJP program in 2012. And I am really interested in what is happening right now in Europe, particularly with this war, with this Russian war against Ukraine. And we are really worried here in the south. And of course, it's really important to support Ukraine. And it's very interesting what I'm hearing, all the words from Tor. But I would like to ask Mr. Abraham, if it's not too risky for the European Union to support, to provide help to Ukraine. It's a great humanitarian posture, but I would like to know if that could provoke, in a way, a heavier Russian reaction among Europe. Is there a possibility for you that Russia could attack other countries?
Well, thank you very much. And I'll be very frank in answering this question too. The situation is very dangerous, and no possibility at all can be ruled out or excluded. But the line which was taken by the European Union and also NATO and the national governments was to avoid any direct confrontation. This is why there is not a regime to close the sky, because that would mean a direct confrontation, and this is considered simply a new level of confrontation, and that could have very negative consequences. On the other hand, we can absolutely, after what we've seen in the last 2 weeks, we cannot be sure of anything. The political steps and decisions have been taken to prepare and to clearly warn the Russian side from touching any NATO territory. And what we have seen the day before yesterday with the attack very close to the Polish border comes close, but still this tragic attack happened on Ukrainian side. And I will conclude with pointing at a story which is already 4 or 5 days ago, or 6 days even, and that was the Polish move of trying to provide the Ukrainians with MiG-29 fighter planes. And the Polish idea was to handle that through the Americans or through NATO, and that, as you know, was blocked exactly because of the risk analysis you were mentioning in your question.
May I add another question on Guillermo's question, Mr. Abraham, because you talked about it and you pointed it out in your introductory remarks, questioning or asking for who could be mediators in this war, because we all see there is at the moment there are no real signs, that the war will come to an end very shortly. And so who could be mediators? Is it Gerhard Schröder, or the former chancellor, or are other people, other experts here possibly involved now to mediate this dramatic situation at the moment?
Well, frankly, the maneuvers of Gerhard Schröder are ridiculous. I'm sure that he intends to help, but with a mission not coordinated with anyone doesn't seem to me a very wise move. So this is simply out of question, and of course Mr. Schröder lacks any authority here in Berlin, even in his own party. So this is certainly not the way. As you know, the German Chancellor Scholz will be in Ankara tonight. That is certainly interesting to follow what happens there. And observers, and I cannot say it from my own experience, but this is what we hear and we see and hope for, is that also from the East, so from Beijing, there might be some indications, signals that China and the world in global are not interested in seeing a collapse of the world economy. And this is what but again, I have to be clear on that. I have no indication that this is what certain observers here in Berlin do expect.
Let's kick the question back to Kiev, to Tore. What do you think is needed in the ground? What do you see? I mean, Klitschko's are permanently asking for more weapons, more guns, fighters, etc., etc. If you have a look at the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, is that okay from your point of view? I mean, you sit in a hotel room, you have internet, you have Zoom, you have light.
Okay, I'm sitting in the expensive hotel room. I'm sitting in the expensive hotel room that I'm paying with my Visa credit card. There's electricity. Again, I'm coming from Beirut, so I'm used to something else, but there's electricity 24 hours, and I don't think only in this hotel room. There's still internet, the mobile networks are still up, and there's good coverage. I don't see, I mean, in the streets, people begging. I think this because the city has mostly emptied. Yeah, I saw more, people standing in line at the border, trying to get into Poland. So I think, the humanitarian effort should be there, or in other big cities, towns that are under fire at the moment, Mykolaiv in the south, for instance, and then Mariupol in the very east. I think, that's where people need aid badly, desperately, but the question is how to give it to these people, how to transport it there. So much for humanitarian aid. Other than that, when we were filling up the car and all the canisters, because there's not many petrol stations where you can still do that, on the way coming from Lviv to Kiev, there was one of this big meaty Ukrainian guy who was filling up the canisters, and he asked where we're from, and with the little English he spoke, he just said, you have to close the skies. I mean, we don't have to get into that because we know what it means if really NATO or any other major power closes the skies, but Ukrainians still repeat that. I think they just need ammunition. They really need ammunition, they need weapons, and I would leave that to military experts what they need. But from the little that I've seen here the last few days, they seem to be putting up a very good fight here, especially here around Kiev and starting the Russian advance. And question is for how long they can do that, what the Russians can still throw into this fight. There was now the talk of people from the Middle East and Wagner group and so on joining the fight. I'm not sure that's going to make such a big difference. That's my impression.
There's a question from Michael Buchsbaum. Michael, would you mind to ask the question directly? We have seen you, maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Yeah. To Mr. Tore, are you seeing or meeting with other foreign fighters? So from other EU countries, there's been reports that there's all these volunteers that are coming in. Are they actually trickling into Kiev? Are you meeting with them? And do you think they can be effective at the defense?
Yeah, I'm sorry that but I guess that's basically my role here today. All I have is anecdotal evidence. When I was taking the train from the airport in Krakow to go into town to Krakow, I met two Americans, and they were like, picture book GIs basically, or their forearms all tattooed up, and they had these big camouflage duffel bags, and I then stayed in a hotel room with them, and they were first working for the US Army as, I think, machine gunners. I think both of them. And both of them had been to Afghanistan. One of them had been to Iraq also. And then they worked in private security, basically guarding bases abroad and then guarding other facilities in America. And both of them had given up their job from one day to the next and decided to join the fight. They were a bit troubled mentally, I would say. They were both high all the time because they were eating these THC lollies. It was quite funny because I stayed in a hotel room with them, and I mean that kind of squares with what I've heard about other fighters, that they're all a bit weird. And then I lost contact with them. So that was what, 5-6 days ago. And then one of them, I texted, the other guy wasn't responsive anymore. And one guy, I reached him yesterday and he said like, yeah, the other guys, they're already going back, but I'm going to stay. But I haven't heard back where exactly they are, which unit slash, part of the military apparatus they've joined. I haven't so far, also because I haven't actively been looking for it, seen any Europeans or Germans.
Let's give it back to Berlin, to Knut Abraham. As Kiev is emptying, Berlin or Germany is filling up. At the moment, there are 10,000 refugees arriving every day at the main station in Berlin. There will be a major camp opening in Hanover at the fairground, south of Hanover. How do you see the situation? Very practically, we have an international audience here, and your office actually is a stone throw away from the main station. Are you seeing these refugees?
Yes.
Is the government doing an okay job? Are there problems you see?
Let me first of all mention that Poland is the country where the influx of refugees is happening mostly. So Poland has sheltered around 1.5, no one knows exactly, million people. And those who come to Germany, yes, most of them by train, by the way. What the federal government is doing together with the federal states is to find a formula where to bring the refugees. I do not expect any difficulties. This will work professionally, and the refugees from Ukraine are warmly greeted here by the population. They know that they are fleeing, that they are escaping from war in Europe, in our neighborhood, and so there is an incredible solidarity. I'm from the federal state of Brandenburg, so which is around Berlin. And in all these smaller cities and villages, people are providing apartments, and many of them were driving with small buses to the Ukrainian-Polish border to bring humanitarian aid and take back refugees. This has now come to an end in a way because it's too chaotic, and of course the refugees need to be registered, not least because they of course have to be protected from people who may not have the best thoughts when picking up women and children. But I'm quite optimistic that things work, and the general mood, the general atmosphere at the main station, which indeed is just there, is very positive, is very warm, and we will certainly manage the administrational challenges too.
Is there an active approach to Poland to support their civic response and to support Poland? Because what we hear is that their means are exhausted at the moment, covering 2 million people arriving in Poland. Is Germany going to help Poland in this way?
Well, I have to say that I'm not aware of any specific information on that, but I'm absolutely convinced that not only Germany but all of the European Union, they will extremely keen on assisting and helping Poland and Slovakia, Hungary, even Moldova, Romania. This will work. I have no doubts that this will work. The more problematic areas is what we have discussed before in other kinds of support.
Okay, then we have another question from Uruguay again. So
From Guillermo.
Guillermo, you want to have your question? The question is for Tore.
Hi. Thank you again. And I have 3 questions for Tor. Sorry, Tor, you are busy. You are doing your job.
Doing my best. Let's see.
And I have 3 questions. The first one is the other reports about human rights violations to local minorities such as LGBTI groups, drug users, poor people, migrants, or other. And the other is if that program for returning Russian captured soldiers to their mothers at the border with Russia is working. And the third question is if how the alt-right, the far right, is living or doing this work.
I'm going to go backwards. So the alt-right thing, I cannot answer. I haven't really followed that from my, more first-hand experience here. I can't say. But I'm sure there might be something on it online. I mean, these 2 American dudes that I met, they weren't really alt-right or anything. They're just very military-minded, let's say. Is the program for returning Russian captured soldiers to their mothers working? I'm not sure it's already in motion, if it has started already. I do know that there was a press conference today with Russian POWs here, which I think is taking place right now, so I couldn't catch it. And I think it's fairly problematic to take prisoners of war and put them in front of a camera. I think that's against the Geneva Convention. However, that idea of returning them and also of setting up this hotline for Russian mothers and for setting up a database is very, very smart of the Ukrainians in the way that they're portraying themselves as really the humanitarian party in this fight. And that is in line with, the whole way that they are conducting their media campaign. The first question regarding the human rights violations, I can say I saw one Palestinian guy at the border in Poland who just exited and basically fled Ukraine, who was bitterly complaining about his treatment at the border. That it took him much, much longer than others to get out, although he had been living in Ukraine for a long time and he had Ukrainian wife and therefore Ukrainian children. And all that that has been covered in great length by different media, that people of color from the Middle East, but also Africa and so on, guest students, so Afghans who had fled to Ukraine, that they were treated badly and notably worse than Ukrainians and white-looking people at the border with Poland, but also the other European countries. So yeah, we could call that human rights violations, definitely.
Thank you, Tore. Oh, there's another question for Mr. Abraham from Melepesti. Do you see Germany as independent from Russian energy in foreseeable future? Any time estimation? And what are the steps being taken right now in Germany to obtain that?
And the question comes from Mele from Estonia.
Yeah. Greetings to Estonia. Well, it is Germany is, and this has now really become too clear in a way, heavily dependent on Russian energy, and in these very hours, everything is done to reduce this dependency. In the long run, of course, there should be trade with another Russia. But in a short and medium term, we have to do 2 things. And I'm an opposition MP, but I now do report on the tactics of the government formed by others. The government is saying to even intensify the efforts on renewable energies. And now comes the opposition, me and my colleagues and friends. This will certainly not be enough. So what I do expect is that we will see a return of the discussion on prolonging the use of German nuclear power plants. And even in medium term, a discussion on bringing back a certain percentage of nuclear energy to our energy basket. So I do expect major changes in our discussion in our energy policy. Especially on natural gas, we see clearly that it's been a huge mistake not earlier to provide technical possibilities as LNG terminals. Again, Poland had been much quicker on that. Now we have to learn it a very bitter way, as most experts here in Berlin expect the energy as still a very critical point in the current situation for this country here.
With regard to the time, I would bundle the next two questions and would ask Mr. Abram first and then Tore to answer this. From Johannes Tangeberg, I assume maybe it's an alumnus from the Nordics, I think.
From Sweden.
From Sweden, as you see, I'm right. Question: the war has led to what has been described as a dramatic change in German foreign policy. Are you agreeing on that? And how should the foreign and security policy under Merkel be assessed in that light or in these lights of what has happened? And the other question for Tore, after the answer of Mr. Abraham, is war in the Arabic brown world versus war in Europe wide world. What's the difference? As you're a journalist, how do you feel about that? Are there any differences in news coverage?
And the question comes from
Anuratma Sharma.
Sharma, who is, I think, in India, but I might be wrong. So
maybe she can correct us. But first, Mr. Abraham, to the European dimension.
All right. Yes, certainly. This is the phrase, the term Chancellor Scholz was using in the grand debate 10 days ago. This is really a historic change, especially for the now ruling Social Democrats, who had strong beliefs in the recipe of Willy Brandt's policy towards Russia, that would work again also with Putin, and it failed. It failed, and so the consequence is a dramatic one, and we will certainly stick to that. We will not go back, even though the details will be complicated. And when I look back, and that was also my time in the Chancellery, we probably should have we should not have avoided the conflict with our social democratic coalition partner in a way we did. We avoided a clear split in government on Nord Stream 2, hoping that everything would go well. It did not, and in the retrospective, I have to say that we were not firm enough on our doubts on the situation. Not naive, but maybe we really try to keep the peace in the coalition for that. And one thing, what is certainly to our address too, as Christian Democrats, and this is the very slow speed or pace in which the German armed forces developed. That was certainly a mistake.
Or the question from our own Anuradha.
The brown world and the white world. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been pointed out in the beginning, and especially in the first week, if I'm not mistaken, of the war, some of the coverage from here, especially from reporters here on the ground, was clumsy to say the least, and callous, and the way that they talked about it. To point out that the people fleeing from here are culturally closer to us is completely right, in my opinion. You know, that's how it is. And you know, the Arab world is predominantly Muslims. Women do predominantly wear hijabs. They don't drink beer that much and whatnot. They don't drink, you know, they don't eat salo and sausages. And yeah, there's a lot. There are more things of, you know, what we do and how we eat and so on that we have in common with Ukrainians. However, some American correspondents I have in mind here, we're like, you know, saying one is the civilized world and the other is the uncivilized world, and not mentioning that the wars that were brought to the Middle East were brought there by you know, the Americans, thinking of the 2003 Iraq invasion and everything that ensued afterwards. So that was with regard to the coverage, and then I, especially on social media, saw the reaction of my Arab, Palestinian, Syrian, and Afghan friends that they're rightfully angry and insulted, but they took it too far. Like now they're seeing this whole war only through that prism and saying, now look at the Europeans and the Westerners, and it's all double standards. And how come all of a sudden they're embracing the concept of, you know, fighting for freedom when they didn't do it with the Palestinians, and they are comparing apples and pears, as we say in German. And that again, you know, also makes me, irritates me quite a lot. Because I think it should be possible for them to see why this war is so extremely relevant, because it hits closer to home, because people are, you know, culturally closer to us, but because it's a war in Europe and it brings back all these nasty memories from 80 years ago and before. Did I answer the question? Let me reread. So yeah, depending, I'm mostly consuming Western media, and I think there has never been a war in my lifetime, at least, that has been that widely covered for the given reasons.
Okay, thank you. That was Anu's question from coming from India. I checked it. Yes, she's an alumna from India. So maybe next question to Knut Abraham again. Your party leader, Friedrich Merz, left it at least in some doubt a couple of days ago whether NATO was going to be engaged in this conflict. Are you standing with a position that NATO should not be involved in this at all, or is this something at the moment that is under discussion in your party?
No, I think it might have been that he wasn't too precise, and this is what we have to be in this war. It's a war. It's not a conflict. It's a war, and it's a very dangerous situation once again. And so we have to be very careful what to do and say in this situation. There is no role for NATO in this war. The role of NATO is to protect NATO territory. Full stop.
Okay, that was a clear answer.
And maybe let me add another question to Mr. Abraham. Still trying to find solutions how to get out of this war. And you mentioned that maybe the Chinese also coming to, what did you say, to Ankara, right?
No. This is a misunderstanding. Oh. There are two tracks. Yeah, the one is the Turkish track, and there are experts here in Berlin who are writing and discussing whether there might be a Chinese path. But this is two separated ideas.
Thank you for this clarification. That helps, because otherwise, my question would be: would you think, as a very well experienced diplomat, would you think that there might be a chance if Germany or the European Union comes along with the Chinese to find a way? So are they in the background? Are there diplomatic negotiations going on? What is your impression on that? That's my question.
I understand your point, but here again, I have a clear answer. No, the decisive signal, if, and again, it's observers who tell us about that, the decisive moment would be the Chinese activities. Europe is probably not considered to be a heavyweight in this kind of conflict.
Well, maybe we can now, with regards to the time, maybe a last question, Tore. If you have one wish to politics today, what could help in Kiev? What would be your wish? And let me add the last question to Knut Abraham as well. If you have one wish for journalists.
What I wish for, shall I start?
Yeah, please. And Knut Abraham, what would be your wish for journalists? How to cover this? How to report on this? Please, Tore.
Yeah. So, my wish goes out to the politician, but also just to the audience, basically just the public, everybody who's at home. Just don't forget about this conflict, which is the case for many conflicts, but this really is of a magnitude and of a relevance for us. Don't see it through the prism of only the price of the petrol that you pump into your car, but actually do keep in mind how people are suffering here and how so many millions have been uprooted. And don't do what is always the case, that you become callous and don't really occupy yourself with the news anymore. Do check the news and do try to get a feel or to understand the atrocities that keep going on here. And please do follow us reporting from here, because I'm not sure how long I'm going to stay right now, but there will be colleagues still reporting from here, and some of them under considerable risk. And so yeah, I hope that is appreciated, but that's not the main point here. What I'm just trying to say is do follow the news and do check on Ukraine, and do try to not to forget. That's it.
Well, thank you very much. It was extremely interesting listening to you, Tore Schröder, and all the best to Kiev, of course.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, good luck. First on journalism, and then there has been a last question too. Yeah, I can only underline, the work of you guys, of journalists in this war is of incredible importance, because there is a second front line, and this is the disinformation front. So it needs proper journalism to counter that. It doesn't need counter propaganda, but it needs information, and so your work is of incredible importance also for the people who are suffering so much at the moment. This makes it difficult to switch to energy policy, as Mr. Buchsbaum has asked here. Yes, I expect the crisis and the war to go on, sadly, a longer period of time, and with the consequences for German energy, I do expect something like a national initiative to cut the administrational hurdles for energy projects in general. Yes, we as in security policy, where we have seen a dramatic shift, we will see that too on energy policy.
Thank you very much, both of you. That was our fifth and final Global Fellows talk for this series, with a lot of questions from practically all over the world, from India, Uruguay, Estonia, Sweden, Germany, wherever we are. Thank you all alumni who took part today and tuned in. We're going to have a donation platform probably later this week. Alumni help alumni. We have a lot of alumni from the Marion Gräfin Dönhoff program of IJP, from Ukraine and from Russia, who are in need at this point, fleeing the countries. I will ask you for your support financially this time, of course. We're going to have a lecture series, a talk series on the crisis coming up in the next couple of weeks. But for now, thank you very much, wherever you are in the world. And I hand over last time to my colleague, Marco.
Yeah, I fully agree on our gratitude of IJP here that first of all, Mr. Abraham and Thor, that you have found the time to talk and to discuss with us here in these really challenging times. I think we've tried to do a balancing act, yeah, between the direct perspective coming out of Kiev from Thor Schröder, Süddeutsche Zeitung correspondent, thank you, and IJP alumnus. And with Knut Abraham, who has tried to describe the political dimension on it. And I think, for instance, my personal opinion on that is it was quite interesting to listen to both of you, and therefore we are really very grateful. So I would like to say goodbye to all of you. Thank you very much. Thor, take care. Good luck
Thank you for having me,
these crisis areas. Sorry.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and all of you stay healthy, and we wish all of us coming peace as soon as possible. Yeah. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.